so again, the chances are that unless it comes all the way down to something like $40 a gallon, the region can still be competitive, although it cannot compete directly with Brazil production. So basically we have a situation of productive capacity, market destination with preferences, investment interests, because now you have companies from the US, from Europe, from Brazil, looking at this market in the region to be able to develop this production. What we don't have, though, is what was the secret of the success in Brazil and in the United States. In the Caribbean basin, none of these countries that produce biofuels or could produce have decided to do what seems to be the most logical aspect of energy security and environmental sustainability, which is let's mandate biofuels into our own gasoline to make energy consumption cleaner, to lower a bit of our import bill. So right now, even if they wanted, none of these producers in this region could sell their ethanol in the region, because none of the countries in the region have established a mandate for clean gasoline in the way that Brazil did or in the way that the United States did. And we have, just to give you a sense, El Salvador is pending legislation which was approved this March. It's the first country to do so. Dominican Republic has legislation mandating 10% ethanol in gasoline blend for 2 years in its parliament, and it still hasn't been approved. Dominican Republic is a country, if they could save 10% of their import bill just because of ethanol blend, they would be saving $400 million a year minimum, because their import bill for oil is $4 billion a year. So again, here's a component which is domestically, which we still haven't figured out with our governments, with our regulators, in order to get going. Some of you would say, it's the oil companies, they don't want this to happen. Well, one of the factors is that, again, this is a blend for gasoline. The purchases of this ethanol are the gasoline companies. They're the ones who put the contracts, because in the US or in Brazil, they're mandated to do it. It is not a price determinant factor. So the fact that they have or don't have ethanol is not something that's going to determine that they have to make or lose more money. It's really a regulatory process. Cuba, which used to be King Sugar. And what's going on there? Again, as I mentioned earlier, there's biofuels all over this region. Any tropical environment has it. What we figured out in Cuba, which at one point in time was the largest sugar producer in the entire Caribbean region, second only to Brazil, and over the years has gone down and down in its annual sugar capability, has not met its quota for sugar in the international market for approximately 20 years, I believe. You have 17 ethanol refineries at a total capacity of 47 million gallons a year. Now remember, I mentioned you the total for the CBI region last year was production of 280 million gallons export into the US, capacity plants of about 400 million. On average, a modern plant nowadays is anywhere from 50 to 100 million gallon capability. So this is telling us something, that there's a great potential in Cuba because there's land, there's sugar, there's labor, but clearly the infrastructure capability to develop the biofuels at a commercially viable rate is not there yet. And since when we look at the companies that are doing investment, new investment in this region, as I mentioned, some from the US, but Brazilian, there's no embargo between Brazil and Cuba. Brazilian biofuel companies are not looking at Cuba. They're looking at Central America, they're looking at Dominican Republic, they're looking at Jamaica. So obviously there's a minimum need of infrastructure capacity to be able to move forth in the marketplace with that. Where does this take us? And I'm at 1 minute. One, the need that there's obviously an opportunity to develop more capacity, because the amount we can export duty-free into the US is extremely underutilized, and pretty much everybody is telling us the demand globally is going to continue to grow for these biofuels. So that's new investments coupled with the balance of geographic capabilities. St. Kitts makes no sense. Antigua makes no sense. Jamaica, it's a different story. Guyana, it's a different story. Continental Central America, there's expansive land that is now being developed in that. And for those of you who have an interest in this, places like Colombia and Peru, they're not going into sugar, they're using African palm. Because African palm oil can be processed to create biodiesel, which is the same blender into gasoline. Second point then, good to have the export markets, good to have duty-free access, but at the end of the day, why not also develop your domestic market? And in this instance, more for something that's environmentally friendly, clean energy, and saves on your oil bill. And now we have tourist industries in the region saying, we need access to renewable fuels, solar, wind, water, and also biofuels in order to become more balanced off. And third and final, which I think is the potential for Cuba, but as I mentioned, still with regards to the infrastructure and what are the investment capabilities, still far off just because the sugar industry has become so underdeveloped there, is joint venture capabilities. And clearly there, the key player is Brazil, some companies from the United States, but then places like Trinidad, Guyana, where they can do joint venture, and places like Jamaica and Central America and the Dominican Republic, where there's extensive land area, where sugar has been competitive in the past and could be so if you have the adequate joint venture facility. Thank you very much.
Thank you, David. You remind me of a saying in Brazil, actually, and I'm going to translate loosely from Portuguese. The Brazilians say, we drink the best and we drive the rest. I guess we should apply the lesson over here. We now open for questions. I believe there's a microphone. Please we'll take a round of questions and for the panelists and then open up for further questions. Thank you.
Hello, Courtney Rattray, Ministry of Foreign Affairs. This is a question for David Lewis. David, how are you doing?
Good to see you.
Just one comment. You say that there is an investment opportunity for producers in the CBI region for sending more ethanol into the United States, taking advantage of the fact that we have a 7% quota and the major competition going into the United States is Brazil. And Brazil has to pay a tariff, and Brazil also has to pay a temporary, call it duty, of 54 cents per gallon exported. So us going into the United States within that 7% and duty-free gives us a competitive advantage. My question is that investors may be a bit gun-shy at the moment from taking advantage of this opportunity because there are several challenges that are being mounted in the United States, not least of which is coming from people like Senator Dick Lugar, Senator Dianne Feinstein, the presumptive nominee for the Republican Party, Senator McCain, several U.S. food processors, all of them wanting to lift the restrictions on Brazilian ethanol going into the United States because fuel prices are so high and food prices are so high. So I don't think this amounts to a great wave of disinvestment in the Caribbean, but certainly I would be interested in hearing your thoughts on what are the prospects for additional investment given the uncertainty of these tariff protections.